Hi, this is Kirby Sommers for the Epstein Project podcast.
And this is Jeremy ROTHE-KUSHEL'S.
We're here to discuss the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. This is day two, and boy, do we have a lot to tell you.
Oh
So
man.
before Jeremy and I get started, please like the video, like the video, like the video, subscribe. So Jeremy, what do you have to say about our Bobby Sternheim?
Oh my gosh, she rolled out a lot of the talking points that have been operating at the level of mass media already in terms of Ghislaine Maxwell as the actual victim. She even took it all the way back to Genesis and Adam and Eve. And since Adam and Eve, women have been basically blamed for, or at least held to account unfairly over and above the crimes of men. So that's one. Rather than Maxwell, the partner of the operation, she came under the thrall and is now being blamed because everybody's titillated by this international mystery man, Jeffrey Epstein. So that's one. And then she even then goes ahead, and I'll read her quote in terms of parts of her opening statement about the addressing. I'd call it the attempt to dress down the espionage aspect that everybody has some kind of sense of in terms of Epstein. So this is Bobby Sternheim, Maxwell's lawyer on Jeffrey Epstein. Quote, he had no wife, he had no children, and he had no boss. Yet he attracted all these rich and powerful people before and after his fall from grace back around 2008. In many regards, he was like a 21st century James Bond. His mystery has stirred interest, unquote.
She's so dramatic, her and Hannibal Lecter and Adam and Eve and James Bond. But that's kind of clever. I mean, don't you think? Just everybody's been talking about he's a CIA agent, he's a Mossad agent, and quite frankly, I even almost want to say that the UK is involved. So let's just throw in MI5. Um, but
Oh,
she gets it out of the West.
but by the way, Kirby, on that account of it, I know we won't do it today, but the end chapters in your book, Ghislaine Maxwell, an unauthorized biography, and the question of how people met Jeffrey Epstein in a Manhattan context, you point out ties directly back to the highest levels of UK intelligence. So I think your assertion there is right on.
Yeah, and I think from sort of right after World War II, um, the UK, the United States, and the new state of Israel just worked collaboratively. And it's my understanding, because I am kind of working on Ghislaine Maxwell blackmail book, the sequel now. It's my understanding, because I'm listening to a lot of whistleblower testimony from former CIA agents and reading about it and kind of doing my deep dives into old court records because all of these guys are dragged into court. That they all of these operations, these covert operations, were kind of divvied up. The Mossad would be in there, MI5, and the CIA, and it's not like it was. It was like it was just a group effort. There were no secrets, and so I think that we got it from Acosta that he was working for intelligence. So was Ghislaine, and for her attorney Bobby Sternheim to have opened it up like, oh, he was a what's the 21st century James Bond. Like, I mean, it's kind of almost making a mockery of it, and but like you said, sort of like people dismiss it. Will this be looked into a little further? I mean, so like you have to wonder what her mindset was when because she gives everything a name, and like you said earlier, it's like a cartoon.
This may be the wrong term for it, but I see it as what you might call a hyper normalization way of attempting to turn all of the very reality based, fact based assertions in terms of how deep this espionage network that both Maxwell and Epstein were one piece of, a crucial piece, but just one piece of, into some kind of movie, to laden it with all of this imagery of movies, which is why I think it's very interesting that you point out the Hannibal Lecter reference. Then Sternheim then brings in James Bond, and then it's all tied together with Adam and Eve. And so the image is, Sean Connery at the table eating his fava beans in telepathic communication with Adam and Eve, or something like that,
Yeah,
rather than a direct, analysis of the facts, such as, and I would just refer people to chapters 20 through 22 of your book, Ghislaine Maxwell, an Unauthorized Biography, where you deal with Stuart Pavar,
yeah,
art collector and scientist, being introduced, and an old friend of Epstein being introduced to Epstein in the early 70s in New York City by Jimmy Goldsmith, who was MI6 and who also handled the Israel account for Conrad Black's Hollinger International. And of course, as you pointed out, post World War II, the creation of the state of Israel very much involved the highest levels, obviously, of the UK government, the Rothschilds, the acquiring of the land, the Balfour Declaration, and then post World War II, then the United States becomes the main protector in the quote unquote special relationship. And so there's a whole espionage background that we won't go into now, that then goes into the question of even some of these UK spy networks of people like Kim Philby, the Cambridge circles. Philby himself looked to have been an early Zionist agent, in addition to having been a Soviet agent, or people like Victor Rothschild in a British context, who looked to have been both a Zionist agent and a Soviet agent, and operating at the highest levels of government in the UK, and in helping set up the security apparatus in Israel. So this does go way back, and that's what we're seeing, just the tip of the iceberg here. And Maxwell's lawyer Sternheim tries to sort of put this all to bed and get out ahead of the narrative in many ways by saying he's a 21st Epstein is just a 21st century James Bond, which of course begs the question of, we know James Bond worked for British intelligence. What was he doing? All right, then what was
that's a
Epstein and
really good
Maxwell
point.
doing?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. But just like her Hannibal Lecter comment backfired, her James Bond comment is going to backfire as of now, because I want to bring in to our exhibit today, on day 2 of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, Annie Farmer's boots. So Annie Farmer, 16 years old, when she was invited by Ghislaine Maxwell, who pretended to be Jeffrey Epstein's wife. So while Bobby Sternheim says that he had no wife, yes, he did. In the eyes of the children and the parents of those children, Ghislaine Maxwell pretended to be his wife so as to make it appear that the children would be safe. So Ghislaine Maxwell approached Annie Farmer's mother, basically said, "We're going to have teenage kids over at the New Mexico ranch. We'd like to bring Annie." And they were given permission. Annie was given permission to go to the ranch in New Mexico, under the auspices that Ghislaine Maxwell was Jeffrey Epstein's wife, and there's this rich couple, and they're kind of doing good things for teenagers, right? For their educational purposes and all of that. So there was nothing to set off alarm bells for at the time, because that's how she presented herself. So Annie Farmer shows up at the age of 16 at the New Mexico ranch that he calls Zorro, after his favorite television movie when he was a kid. Um, and in order to kind of like start grooming her, they take her shopping. They take her shopping and they buy her a pair of cowboy boots. 16-year-old with a pair of cowboy boots in a very exotic place like New Mexico. That's an exciting thing. Well, I thought it was interesting that 3 months ago, when they were requesting certain things, that among the things the attorneys for Ghislaine Maxwell were requesting were Annie Farmer's boots from the time that she was 16 years old. And I thought to myself at the time, well, that's very odd because Annie is now 40. She's not 16, she's 40. So I thought, well, how would they even know that she has a pair of boots sitting in her closet somewhere from the time she was 16? So I kind of thought, well, let me just wait because it will reveal itself at some point. Well, voila, it did, because yesterday, Bobby Sternheim told the court in a way that I guess was meant to reduce Annie Farmer's credibility. She said, well, the boots are well worn. And then, based on my history of having been followed, stalked, and watched for so many years in so many different ways, I immediately went to that space where it's like, after Annie Farmer left that New Mexico ranch, she must have been followed in some way. Number A, just to even for the Maxwell team to know that she still had the pair of boots. B, to know that, yeah, she wore them. I mean, why wouldn't she? She was a kid and she liked them. They were probably a nice, expensive pair of boots. Why wouldn't Annie wear them and wear them out? I mean, but for them to know about it. So I think she was being followed, tracked, uh, for a long time, for them to now suddenly pull up the boots and say, oh yeah, she wore them out, kind of almost to make it sound like Annie could not have been frightened about from Maxwell because she wore the boots. I mean, but that whole thing had smells of a James Bond thing. And in this case, it's Glenn being the James Bond.
Yes, and I think that what you picked up on here in terms of the fact pattern that Maxwell's representation and Maxwell herself knew to be able to go looking for these boots and what then they could do within them. And put aside right now that all of these narratives that they're using to try to attack the victims in this case is basically everything being turned on its head. And it's the standard application of pointing the finger at someone else about what you yourself are most guilty of. But the specific forensics that are implied by what you noticed here in terms of Maxwell's legal team's interest in Annie Farmer's boots, I think operates potentially on multiple levels. I think it's prima facie surface evidence of exactly what you say, that it shows that Annie Farmer was under some kind of long-term surveillance, the kind that is fairly openly understood now in terms of things like FBI files being released and the kinds of thing, the notation that would be made in relationship to tracking someone who's under suspicion of something, where you would identify who they were with, what they were wearing, where they were going, just the basics and all of that. But this layer would be beyond questions of law, quote unquote, law enforcement, to the level of espionage, and beyond that towards the question of maintaining control over a blackmail network that's blackmailed itself in many ways. And so so this is just my thinking through other layers of Annie Farmer's boots, but it's not beyond the pale to imagine that whenever people are receiving objects, and of course Sternheim could reference all kinds of Hollywood movies that have been made that include the question of objects that are given to somebody that are then have tracking devices implanted even within them. And anybody can go and look that, of course, has been talked about for more than 10 years openly, maybe 15 years openly in the mainstream press about shoes with tracking devices and all of that. And we don't need to go there in terms of speculation in relationship to what you are pointing out in a prima facie way, that this is veritable proof that Maxwell's people had Annie Farmer under some kind of long-term surveillance. And I guess my final thought in terms of this is that this is crucial. This is a crucial piece of this case that will very likely be somewhat covered up, very likely by both the prosecution, and the defense, is the scale of surveillance that was going on here, both geographically and even the layers in every place in terms of live feeds of video. And now the main pilot of Jeffrey Epstein, Vysotsky, I think his name is Larry
Yeah,
Vysotsky.
Larry. Mhm.
He was testified to installing more video equipment. So this is already beginning to make its way onto this case's evidentiary record. And there is also, some testimony to the fact that there were live feeds being
Yes,
accessed out of this, right?
yes. So when Maria Farmer began to speak about her experience at Leslie Wexner's home, um, she said something, if recollection serves me right, that number one, when Epstein was at the and to describe it, it is the guest house. It is the 30,000 square foot guest house that is 5-minute walk from Leslie Wexner's main home on this like sprawling ranch in New Albany. So that when Epstein was there, he showed her some more pinholes in the walls, and basically, she understood that he had already shown her the pinholes in the Upper East Side mansion, so she understood. Okay, well, this house is being there's surveillance here too. Uh, However, she was doing something and then using hair dye, and a small amount of dark hair dye dropped on a white carpet. She didn't think anything of it, except she immediately gets a phone call from Ghislaine Maxwell, who starts to yell at her and berates her for, ruining the carpet, and that, Abigail is really upset. The fact that Abigail is upset means that there's a camera also going into Leslie Wexner's home. And in fact, Maria Farmer did say that she was being live, and that everything that was happening with her in the house, in the guest house, 30,000 square foot guest house, was being live fed into Abigail and Leslie Wexner's home. Um, because there was nothing that she did that was not seen. She also said that in New York, when he sent her, meaning Jeffrey Epstein sent her to Wexner's flagship store, Victoria's Secret, to go get, I believe it was a bra, and none of them were comfortable because they're all cheaply made from China, where I'm not even going to get into that right now. But anyway, so she decided to get some pajamas and get something. So she went back to Jeffrey Epstein's office, which was a couple of blocks away, and Jeffrey Epstein clearly had seen her on a video camera that was streaming into his office. And so she was like, oh my God. And she felt completely humiliated and embarrassed, that she thought, oh my God, they have these cameras in the store as well. So they were like, so the fact is, and then so that there's more. In court documents, an unnamed tech from Ohio has been documented, and I think this came out during the Virginia Giuffre versus Ghislaine Maxwell defamation lawsuit, that there is a tech from Ohio that used to make a trip wherever Jeffrey Epstein was to pick up the video so that if it's not live streaming into Leslie Wexner's home at, at some point, right, that it was being picked up wherever Epstein was and taken back to Ohio for Leslie Wexner. So, like, I mean, I don't understand why the court, who apparently has access to, let's say, either the confiscated tapes or the surveillance that they have on all of us, right? Or they can easily just go to Leslie Wexner and and say, hey, we need to see the videos that you have, because clearly everyone knows about the videos. Uh, they're not doing that. And everything that the victims are stating happened was caught on camera and in many cases live streamed.
This is a crucial point that I think really calls into question, or I'd say condemns, the ultimate nature of what is being done under this prosecution. Because, all right, there are cases where what's called parallel construction in a post sort of NSA mass surveillance context in the United States of America, for example, there are ways in which video surveillance or signals intelligence surveillance that is only potentially legal in a national security and a foreign intelligence kind of intercept kind of way. If there's information that points at domestic criminal aspects, then it's been documented that what will happen is that the U.S. intelligence will work with local uh, police and prosecutors and help point them in the right direction so that they can then develop their own legal evidence in order to try a domestic criminal case. This is very different even than that, because as you point out, the court, the prosecution, this is based on FBI. The FBI raided all of these properties. There is there must be reams of audiovisual evidence that is properly belongs to the prosecution and could be readily used to prove their case in full live audio and video. At the very least, contextually, it would show that the context of the allegations are exactly what the victims are saying they are. And yet we imagine, and very likely, there's not going to be any of this kind of evidence that's brought into it. Now, if there is, I'll be very surprised, and I will retract that my suspicion of that. But you would think that it would be an open and shut case at some level by the prosecution bringing in these reams of videos that were taken. So that's one side. I think what you just explained really calls into question the nature of this prosecution and the way that they're going about it, and how easily it will then be defended against by accusing the victims of what the actual perpetrators did themselves. And but there's this other piece of this about what this then suggests about the nature and the depth and the power of this espionage and blackmail network that the sex trafficking part of Epstein Maxwell was just a piece of, and that these live feeds of that people such as Leslie Wexner had direct access to, not just in his own homes, whether the ones that he gave, quote unquote, gave to Epstein in New York City, or the ones that were still on his property in Ohio, but also in the retail stores, as you laid out in terms of Victoria's Secret. It begins to point directly at the scale of this, I think. And I just point out that obviously one of the names that's implicated in this case that will very likely not be mentioned at all would be someone like the former president Bill Clinton, who we've spoken about a few times in terms of his White House having been there was some kind of contracting out of communications technology to Israeli intelligence companies. And you point out not just one, but I'll point out that the one that I was most familiar with was called Amdocs, which proclaims to be an American company located in Chesterfield, Missouri, I believe, just a little bit northwest of St. Louis, Missouri. But go look into the background of Amdocs and how pervasive their technology is in terms of total American mass communication and signals communication. And then factor in that it was mainstream news that the Israeli government, on up to like people like Ehud Barak, there are pictures of Ehud Barak with Clinton in an official capacity in 1999, that the Israeli government was directly spying on Clinton's White House. And you've pointed out some very interesting things that I haven't seen anybody respond to, which would then immediately implicate the current administration, the Biden administration, in terms of someone like Anthony Blinken as Secretary of State, and his familial relationship with maybe the closest confidant and maybe consigliere and legal fixer of Robert Maxwell, Samuel Pissar. And then Leah Pissar, you have made an allegation that Leah Pissar is actually Mega the Mole, the Israeli spy who is identified inside of the Clinton White House. Now, that's the human intelligence side of what I've talked about in terms of the Maxwell family as a family of spies. Hashtag Maxwell crime family, as you begin
Absolutely.
pushing out there.
Yeah.
But they're also a family of spies. And so Ghislaine, I've alleged, was handed over Robert Maxwell's human intelligence network. The twins, the Isabel and Christine, were, looks like, handed over the technology component, the signals intelligence component of the family spy business. And so you can see just within the Clinton White House, in terms of what you put forth in terms of the analysis of Leah Pissar being the actual human intelligence mega, the mole Israeli intelligence spy inside of the Clinton White House, and then also then what I'm talking about in relationship to live feeds of signals intelligence surveillance in the White House via Israeli intelligence company Amdocs. The allegation was that their headquarters in Chesterfield, Missouri, Amdocs, was getting live feeds of signals intelligence directly out of the Clinton White House and giving a direct live feed back to the highest levels of the Israeli security state. And so I think that needs to be brought into this context of understanding how high this goes in terms of the nature of this both espionage and blackmail network.
So yes, and I want to clarify that if we say that the twins inherited a certain portion of Robert Maxwell's um, intelligence network, if you will, and that the brothers Ian and Kevin were handed another piece of it, and that Glenn was handed another. I think that does a disservice to explaining the um, the actual size of this ring, which already had Leslie Wexner in the United States, already had someone like Leon Black in the United States, that already had several people in the United States before Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell started to work together. So that these various threads, I don't know what else to call them, threads, interlock with, they were, because again, it's multi-generational, but it's not, some people are trying to make it sound, it's not you, incidentally, but other people that I have spoken with have been trying to make it sound as if it was Robert Maxwell soul, a sole entity who was doing X, Y, and Z for these countries, and that he passed on not only a huge amount of money that perhaps he stole, but that he passed down this small little ring to Ghislaine and her boyfriend, Jeffrey Epstein. I don't see it that way. That's not the way that it comes across in my research. It didn't come across like that when uh, Dylan and when the guys that wrote Robert Maxwell, Israel Super Spy, Martin Dillon and
Gordon Thomas.
yes, thank you. They saw no sign of Epstein in the Maxwell sphere, so not like her boyfriend or anything like that until you know she connected with him later on. However, my point is that this is a much broader situation. And when we talk about live streaming, let's say in the Victoria's Secret store, I don't know if you remember, but back in the 1980s, it became like a little bit of a scandal, at least here in New York, when it was discovered that Alexander's, another department store, and at the time, one owned by the Rickless family, Gimbels, um, had recording video devices hidden in the rooms, so again, live feeding somewhere else. And immediately the story kind of made mainstream media and then disappeared. I think I was able to find one source that was still around. And I tweeted about it 2 years ago, because that's kind of when I started to tell people, hey, this stuff has been around for a long time. You're just not aware of it. Um, but so that again, I just think we're like even Larry Viscosi, who began giving his testimony in court late yesterday afternoon. It may have been around 4, and then the judge stopped it at 4:55, and this morning he resumed. And you said it earlier that he was not only picking up luggage from, let's say, the New York property, Epstein's residence, the largest mansion in all of New York, but he was also installing video equipment. So I'm curious, at the day's end, if anyone is going to question that a little bit further, because if they don't, then we already know what the result will be for this trial.
Yes, and I appreciate you reminding us and me of the expanse of this, and also how domestically already entrenched these networks, including the child sex trafficking aspect of it, in addition to the espionage aspect of it, was before there was any Maxwell crime family
Yeah.
involvement in the North American sphere. And I think that's a crucial, definitely a crucial point. And as you point out, that it's very likely the case that things like live feeds of video, as comes out in relationship to the farmers, and testimony around uh, Wexner and Victoria's Secret, was very likely happening in many other contexts. And it makes a lot of sense that what they are going to accuse the victims of being the actual ones who were involved, and the cultivators of the network that they are now just trying to make money from, and all of that, that this is a tried and true practice of not only of this specific Epstein Maxwell Wexner network, but also of parallel networks, in terms of probably keeping an eye out for the cultivation of new victims, basically, and then the ability to then keep a track of them. So these are things that I think we need to understand, not just in this specific Maxwell case, but in a much broader and longer term kind of operation. And I think we do have to keep our eye out for areas, and that would include geography, such, for example, that Vysotsky talked about. He was flying into Stanley, New Mexico, which is that's the access point, the basically the probably the the covert access point to some extent in relationship to the Zorro Ranch property. And so people are very familiar with things in terms of like Iran Contra and the cocaine drug running in relationship to Bill Clinton's Arkansas Mina and all of that. But we've also talked about how Leslie Wexner represents a whole other piece, very likely a higher level strain and command structure of that exact same Iran Contra network, which would include trafficking, very likely of both drugs, arms, humans, and that Wexner's geography is much more Columbus, Ohio, and his then taking in of Southern Air Transport, this key black ops uh, air company, and bringing it into a Columbus, Ohio context. And so then this Stanley, New Mexico, people, I think we then begin to look at there's a whole other geography here of these, these airfield access points for when one is very likely involved in things like, illegal trafficking of humans, drugs, and arms.
Yes, Wexner certainly was involved with allowing use of Victoria's Secret under the limited, as per Bob Petrakis's work. I believe it was in 19, I think it was in 1995. However, the CIA used Dayton, Ohio, as early as 1984, 1985, in addition to Mina Airport, when Bill Clinton was the president. I mean, the what was he, the governor?
Yeah.
And the I believe it was some kind of military air strip also in Arkansas, in addition to some other places. And before we had Southern Air, which, by the way, Bill Barr was the attorney for, we had Air America, who was actively bringing in drugs from, back and forth to Vietnam in the during the Vietnam War. Um,
In the
so
body
that,
bags of dead
yeah,
soldiers. Yeah.
yeah. So there's that. However, this trial is never going to give the public a resolution, because even Iran Contra was sort of a very watered down version of what really happened in during that scandal, which Barr tried so hard to sort of keep uh, the lid on. So this is, like, quite frankly, this is the sort of the biggest trial. This is the biggest sort of like, it's just the most scandalous thing that's ever, I believe, gone into a court of law. This is the biggest. She represents the biggest trafficking ring ever. And the question, of course, is, are we going to get real answers? What I want to be able to kind of reconfirm is something you just said regarding how they are trying to discredit the victims. Uh, in the court, they basically said, "Oh, well, Annie Farmer got X number of dollars from the Jeffrey Epstein compensation fund, and Jane Doe too got this amount of money, and that none of the victims thought Jeffrey Epstein was a bad guy, or that Ghislaine Maxwell was, evil or had done anything to them, until there was suddenly all this money." Um, and so they're making it sound like, because of the settlements, that in fact, they were forced to receive, right? The government set up this and Epstein victim compensation fund, and who ran it. I think it's important to always look at who runs things because it gives us an idea of, again, the scale of this. Even though only 150 victims approximately applied for compensation, it was headed by the same attorney, and he's got an assistant. So it's a man and a female whose names, I think it's Feinstein or something like that. Find something.
Is it
Um,
Feinberg?
yes, it's Feinberg who
Kenneth
ran.
Feinberg?
Yes. Oh, you didn't know?
I began to that I saw that Sternheim had said that the same people who were involved with the 9/11
Yes.
fund were also involved in the Epstein fund. And for some reason, I don't know when this happened in terms of Kenneth Feinberg, but he is a crucial person to understand in all of that. And there is a big can of worms that Sternheim opens by basically pointing that out.
Yeah, but not a lot. See, that's the thing. Not a lot of people are aware. And not only was he in charge of the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund, but he was involved with the Archdiocese, the compensation fund for the Catholic, all the boys who became men, right? Who then were compensated, and some obviously just did not want to take the money, just like a lot of the victims did not want to take anything. Um, but this was set up kind of like here it is, and frankly, the approval process was not even like very stringent, right? I know someone who was not approved because I don't believe her story, right? But she's not someone that even mainstream media has discussed. She's just somebody who's, there are going to be maybe operatives, right? Controlled opposition people who are inserted into the mix to sort of make the real victims not look like victims. That's kind of the way I looked at that person, and I was curious to know, well, have you gone to the Epstein compensation fund? And it's like, yeah, but I wasn't approved. I'm like, you're thinking, I know their bar is not that high. You just have to say your name, tell them the year, the amount of times you were, you know, abused, and pretty much, they're not going to do an extensive background check on you. If you sound like you are, then you're going to get a certain amount of money. So, but yeah, I mean, uh, but they're trying to basically say that it was the money that incentivized, and I want to say that they have to stop using old tricks, because here we have Ghislaine Maxwell, who, according to all mainstream media and according to her own statements, was dead broke after her father pushed or was fell off the Lady Ghislaine on November 5th, 1991. She comes to New York. She starts to do this, so that she could have the lifestyle that she was accustomed to. She was accustomed to living in, she grew up in Headington Hill Hall, a 53-room mansion with servants at her beck and call. And she then had two homes, that her father bought for her. And she had unlimited access to spend like like no one. And then suddenly her father is dead. It's discovered that it's been a fraud, that he has been a thief, and he robbed people, and he uh, basically committed, there's just a bunch of serious frauds. She comes to New York and she starts all over again. She hooks up with Jeffrey Epstein. And in order to maintain her lifestyle, and by the way, the $23.5 million in her 5 different bank accounts that finally was revealed, not the first time she appeared in court, but the second time, because she just was not upfront about even being married to Scott Borgerson, who, by the way, has been missing in action. He's not in court. Or, I mean, really, it's just her and Scott Borgerson they just need a whole show of their own. But then she has these 5 bank accounts, and then she's put everything in his name. Well, where did that money come from? That money came from trafficking these children. And by the way, one of the victims was like in her mid-20s when she had the unfortunate situation of meeting Epstein and Maxwell. Uh, but they're basically saying, oh, they got maybe a $1.5 million. And by the way, when you pay taxes on that $1.5 million, you're not left with a lot, and you're left with post-traumatic stress disorder, and you're followed forever, and in some cases you're murdered. So that, I'd rather have no money, like I have lived my life, no money, but I'm still have the PTSD and I still have people following me. But for somebody to have $23.5 million, and who else? What else does she have stashed that we don't know about? There has to be. That's kind of like makes no sense to me. Maybe they just hope that the jury is stupid, and that's just an insult to everybody's intelligence at this point. That's kind of the way I see it.
I'm totally disgusted now, and I feel bad that I didn't recognize the setup of this money fund and Feinberg's role in it, because especially now seeing the way that they're rolling it out as a weapon for the defense, this is outrageous actually in terms of that, because usually whenever you see Kenneth Feinberg involved in some kind of big money payoff, it's usually surrounding some major event where there's someone who has additional uh, responsibility, legal responsibility, that there's layers that someone doesn't want the public to get into or have legal standing. For example, you talked about he was not only involved in the archdiocese payoff, but he was also involved in the Penn State payoff. So there's
Right.
a multiples of sexual child abuse, potential trafficking cases where he's then involved in using money after the fact to basically sue, to sort of like turn the whole question off by giving people money. And 9/11, he used the money in that case to make sure that victims' family members didn't continue to have legal standing to be able to pursue a legal recourse, where you then have discovery and all those things. But it even goes way back to he was involved with the Zapruder film in terms of the Kennedy
Oh, I didn't know
assassination.
that.
Yeah, the BP oil disaster. Just go look at his background and see
Okay.
exactly every single major American public scandal of a major proportion where there then is some kind of big money payoff after the fact. He is deeply involved in it. And then finally, the reason I'm so disgusted in this case is then, all right, they bring in Feinberg to organize the money that, as you point out, justly is the very least that is owed
Yeah.
to the scores and scores and scores of victims, those who survived these crimes against them. And then not only do they use the money then to sort of soothe the inquiry into it, they then it's turned back around by using the defense is then able to use that to accuse the actual victims in this specific case of being only interested by money. It's a totally fraudulent situation, especially in terms of when you then go back to Sternheim describing Epstein as a man of mystery and a James Bond. Think about the way that, in a way of actually covering for him, he was described as an international money man of mystery, or the talented Mr. Epstein in the New York
Right.
Magazine and Vanity Fair, respectively, if not respectfully. And so this I think is a crucial point to then drill down on the weaponization of these the way that the money is then handled in relationship to those with standing and victims in relationship to these big events. And this is an unprecedented and outrageous use of these setups that Kenneth Feinberg has been part of
Yes,
almost
so
every
it just,
significant one.
yeah, and so it surprised me when this was in mainstream media. It surprised me when I didn't hear people react in the way I just heard you react, and that is why I adore you. It's because you get it and you understand and you know how this fits together. And so the fact that Feinberg was called in to handle this, it reinforces what you and I have kind of felt all along, that this is a much bigger ring than will ever be made public. And by the way, I just want to make sure that people understand that the victims had lawsuits against Ghislaine Maxwell, but they were told by the Feinberg people, you have to drop the lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell and anyone else that you're suing that was part of the Epstein thing. And get this, and by the way, this is a sure thing, and that you're just taking a gamble because you have to go to court. So what did they do? They dropped the lawsuits, they took the money, and now they're being condemned for doing what they were told to do by very, very um, shady people involved in very shady stuff.
Gosh, this is what happens. There's a lot being written about, and actually there's a film even made about Feinberg, surrounding
Yeah,
the
I had to
20th
stop
anniversary.
watching it.
Oh, I
Yeah,
never saw it.
I just I've become so jaded with anything that's made for us to absorb that I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be lied to. I'll just find the information myself. I
Yeah.
just can't. I can't do. It's terrible. I haven't watched television since 2009. And I'm very careful about what I watch. If like I pull up something on Netflix, it's like Halle Berry, in that new movie. It's like I could tolerate that, even though I hate seeing her take a beating. I'm like, okay, at least they're not lying to me about history, about how it really, that's I just can't. I can't do Hollywood or and even the music industry. It's like eh, we have been um we have been steered wrong for so long that I want to retain my ability to sense and to see and to because you very very you're very good at picking up the fact that when she made that James Bond statement that she was normalizing this extreme situation, and that's basically what I want to stay away from, let's say from mainstream media or from movies. I don't want to be I don't want to be desensitized because that's what they do to us.
Yes, and the reference Sternheim, I think at the very least this is a good chance to study this intersection of the law and quote unquote national security and the media, especially big Hollywood, really, in terms of Sternheim's background. She is not only tied into some defending mob networks, it looks like, but she
Yep.
also has national security clearance. And so there, that is the archetype of the deep state, that intersection between mob and national security, espionage. And then she then brings in, as you point out again, the references to media and the hyper normalization of these kinds of of this imagery that surrounds the evidence in this case. And of course, the very simplistic thing she does is she associates Epstein with James Bond, who's a debonair kind of smooth spy who's not doing, wouldn't never take advantage of a child, and that kind of thing. And so that basically then paints this network with the best glow, the most positive glow from Hollywood, while also putting the glow, which is most important, on top of it, which takes it out of the sense of our connection to core political reality into a realm of fantasy and overlays of media representation, which at a very visceral level disconnects us, I think, from
Yeah.
the reality.
So, before we wrap up, I just want to make a statement about Ghislaine Maxwell and how she walked into the court on day one. But I also want to discuss, have you explain something about Judge Nathan. So on day one, Ghislaine Maxwell, and her colors have always been, if you look at old photographs of her, she likes white and black, and she likes to pair them. So, she got her hair cut, she got it dyed, she showed up in court. Basically, I mean, the sketches are just really fascinating because she does look very villainous um, in this white, and to me, I was in the fashion industry at one time, so to me, even the way the turtleneck, very fashionable with long sleeves that kind of puffy at the bottom, the way the sweater is drawn tells me that it's a silk sweater. So she's wearing a white silk turtleneck. Um, and then she's wearing a black pair of slacks. So she's wearing her numbers, her colors, but she walks in and she's escorted by federal marshals, but she's her head held high, straight. It's like on the one hand, you wonder, so is she taking one for the mob? The mob being this trafficking ring, and some of the people we know their names, or is she putting on an act because prior to this, she was supposedly was losing all of her hair. She was a shadow of her former self. She had lost. So she looked very healthy, and so she had a lot of hair. So it's like, so she's not going to play that card. It's just, it was just very, like right there, it was like busted, right? So, but the other thing was, I tweeted yesterday that Judge Nathan is a member of the Skull and Bones thing, and I had actually went and I found confirmation of it on all places Wikipedia. They had listed all of the politicians throughout history, and then they went on down the list, and at the very bottom were the judges. And I thought, well, should I take a screenshot of this? Nah, I'm just going to tweet it. And of course, some people were like, oh, no, she's not. And I'm thinking, okay, you're blocked, you're blocked, you're blocked, you're blocked. Well, someone then today did that, and I went back to the same page, the same exact page, and it was gone. The whole page had changed, although the page basically says that it has not been changed, I think, since November 2nd or November the 3rd, but I know that they can fudge that. So then, I think you said it and someone else said it, that she's a member of something that is like the Skull and Bones. Why don't you explain it? Because I don't really know that one very well.
Yeah, so Judge Nathan is was part of what's called Quill and Dagger, which is the skull and bones of Cornell University. And so there's a few different high level secret societies or societies at these universities, the Ivy League, Skull and Bones, Scrolling Key at Yale University, but Quill and Dagger is recognized as basically the Skull and Bones of Cornell University, where Nathan went. And so it turns out that this is a very substantial network that she is a part of in terms of Quill and Dagger. And I would say it shows that she is part of the Old Boys Network at the very
Right.
least, and you can go and look at the Wikipedia page of Quill and Dagger and see all who has been involved in it over the years, and it's from early in the 20th century. But you can then here, I'll just point out a few interesting figures here. that 5 members of George W. Bush's administration were Quill and Dagger members: Stephen Friedman, Stephen Krasner, Paul Wolfowitz, Stephen Hadley, and Carol Kuntz. And then they point out President Barack Obama's administration included Deputy Secretary of Labor Seth Harris and Associate Counsel to the President Allison J. Nathan, and then other
Right.
positions too. And then a few other interesting people who were part of Quill and Dagger that I saw was someone named Jules Kroll, who was the founder of the Kroll company. And there's a whole background there.
Wait. Don't go yet. You know, Jules Kroll was Robert Maxwell's one of his attorneys that he used. In fact, he had a meeting with him just before he disappeared off his yacht. And Jules Kroll was also retained by Ghislaine Maxwell currently.
Whoa.
Oh yeah, I have to send you stuff because yes, so Kroll is not out of the picture yet. Um, I mean, this whole thing is when we look at the history of these people and see how they're interconnected. You know, I almost want to say, why are we having this dog and pony show, right? I mean, let's just save some taxpayer money, let the people have a nice holiday, you know, the jurors, and let's just call it a day. The victims can't be continuously tortured, right? It's like, you know, if you're going to do this, do it. But from where I sit and from what we know, you know, I have to say, I give this a thumbs down. I don't think this is going to give us what we want.
I agree with you, and at the same time, we also should and do recognize that this is a major breakthrough that is due to the efforts of the survivors and victims of these crimes, and those who are independent investigators and pursuing journalistic functions of not letting this story go. And also we do have to acknowledge that this is not going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and it's definitely not going to be justice. I'm totally convinced. However, that doesn't mean that our duties are then done. Actually, that's the point of this whole thing, is to try to put this whole thing to bed. That's my sense of it. And we will refuse to allow this to be the end point of putting this to bed, while also continuing to help uncover, while this is in motion, what's actually being implied in the middle of this case and the testimony that's supplied, both in terms of the unspoken context of what is said, but also then what's not being said, who's not being talked about. And so I'm glad that we then dealt a little bit with this background, the old boys club of the judge
Yeah,
herself here. And Jules Kroll, you're so right on, and he's actually a major piece of the back end of the Israel Super Spy book about Robert Maxwell,
that's
by
right.
Martin Dillon and
Good
Gordon
memory.
Thomas. And then finally, one last person I'd like to mention who's a part of this Quill and Dagger Old Boys Network that Judge Nathan is a part of is a man named Mark A. Belnick, who I believe will then speak directly to what you've been reminding us again and again, because we need it, that this is a network that is through and through something like Iran Contra, but way back before there was even Maxwell in the United States. This goes way, way back. But Mark Belnick, who was who was a member of Quill and Dagger, was the chief corporate counsel and executive vice president of Tyco International from 1998 to 2002. Go do some background research on
Oh,
Tyco
I know
International.
everything about Tycho. Yeah,
And then he was also the deputy chief counsel of U.S. Senate Iran Contra Affair Committee. All right, so this is this is what this network has already been involved
I
in terms
mean,
of cover-ups.
I have to tell you, they're not very good at cover up.
Not if you know where to look. It doesn't seem like it. But it's. I think you're right too, Kirby. That more and more they need to get a new shtick, and they keep repeating the same forms, and more people are getting hip to it. My sense of the ideal and the idea of what our responsibility is as, let's say, in an American context, but that this could also extend worldwide to international civil society, is to be a good and smart and undupable member of a jury as a member of the public, and that we don't have to all be experts in all these different areas of forensics. We just need to be able to have a discerning eye in relationship to those that are propped up as experts. For example, what Maxwell's defense will prop up as an expert about false
Yeah,
memory, and say
yeah.
that all these victims are just imagining these things based on narratives that they were given. So be a discerning member of both the public and as a hypothetical member of a jury, and we will be okay moving forward here, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. This is historic. We've made it this far. There'll be a permanent record of this, uh, which hopefully will not be locked away. Many of us are taking notes as it happens in real life. So hopefully we will have a record of what's happening in this trial. This will, at the very least, give closure to some of the victims that are, there are only four represented, but there are others that are in court, sort of for, for their own closure. When something of this magnitude happens to someone at a young age, or really any age, when you're taken advantage of and you're you know you're you lose sight of who you are, and you have to kind of rebalance yourself, sort of like, oh, somebody duped me, so I must not have a good uh, person detector, and you start to doubt yourself. Well, no, it's not you. It's that there are evil people in this world, and they function at a very sophisticated level that is much like a military. So it's not you, it's not us. I was one of these people too. And I learned, oh, I can't be down on myself. No, no, no. It's terrific that I figured out what this is all about, and I was able to just move beyond it. And here I am, you guys have to read Ghislaine Maxwell, an unauthorized biography, and Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy, and maybe subscribe to my newsletter, because I came out on the other end. And if I did it, and now I'm an author, and I have Jeremy, who's the smartest guy on the planet, talking to me on a podcast. Well, if I can do this, you can do it too. Jeremy, I'm going to let you have the last word.
Well, other than making me blush, Kirby,
Uh,
I I want to. That is a great way to end it in terms of, even remember what George W. Bush said. Shame on trick me once, shame on
yeah,
you. Right? We can't get tricked again. All right.
that's
So
it.
and so you point out that we who are humans, who have a sense of good faith and have a sense of trusting and of an open heart to humanity and to people that we would like to be able to trust, are can be readily deceived and readily duped, and then readily coerced by that. And especially when you pile on top of it what you said, in terms of, this is not just your average sociopath
No.
who is good at lying. We're talking about military grade
Mhm.
psychological operations, and although they don't have a ton of sophistication, it doesn't look like you point out, they have the military repetition on their side. And so over and over and over and over and over and over again, and it can wear people down. And I think I just want to highlight that your example, both as a person and as a public voice, is exactly what we need to focus on. That we all have the ability to, if we can gain some courage. It took courage to do what you did, right? And courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is when you feel fear and then you move beyond it and act anyways. And you move in a transformative fashion often because there's a crisis that needs to be met. And so I just want to thank you for your contribution in the public realm and your intellectual companionship, specifically in this case, Kirby. And I want to thank everybody out there who's willing to give their hearts and minds to these very difficult matters, but very crucial matters, both in terms of our nation, but also our humanity.
Well, that was very nicely said. So it's Kirby Sommers and
Jeremy Rothkushel.
for the Epstein Project podcast. Thanks for listening. Hey, leave your comments, like the video. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.